Round one, fight!
So I'm guessing if you've clicked on this video, there's a good chance that you're aware of the Capcom Fighting Collection. You know, that recent collection of rare and previously unreleased fighting games from Capcom's back catalogue? Well, you might not be aware of the Japanese release of this, called the Capcom Fighting Collection Fighting Legends Pack, which bundles together the Capcom Fighting Collection with the 30th Anniversary Collection, that other collection that Capcom put out back in 2018, which contains a bunch of Street Fighter games. Now, this isn't going to be one of my typical reviews. I'm not going to talk about the development history or even deep dive any of the titles included here. There are 22 games after all. No, what I wanted to do is just give you an overview of what this collection is because it's rad, and if you were thinking about picking up the Fighting Collection, I think it's worth knowing that this is an option and why it's superior to the English version. So, what exactly do you get in the Fighting Legends pack? Well, as I just mentioned, you get the Japanese versions of both the Capcom Fighting Collection and the 30th Anniversary Collection. The games included across both collections are as follows: Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Hyper Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Street Fighter 3, Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Red Earth, Cyberbots, Super Gem Fighter Minimix, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, Darkstalkers, Night Warriors, Vampire Savior, Vampire Hunter 2, Vampire Savior 2, oh, and Super Street Fighter 2 The Tournament Battle if you picked up this collection for the Switch. That's a shitload of games. I'm not done though. You also get the Japanese version of every game I just listed, and no, I'm not reading them all out. If you weren't aware, the Japanese versions of these titles have slight differences, such as balance tweaks and name changes, like the Alpha games being called Zero and Red Earth being called Warzard. Sadly, it's not all on the one disc, but logistically, I understand why Capcom did it this way. Why print a bunch of new discs when you can repackage existing stock? Still, a single disc would have been a more elegant solution. That said, the box that this comes in is pretty nice. While it is cardboard, at least I think it is, this isn't some Indiana Jones 4K collection job. Oh no, this is the real deal. It's built like a tank, complete with custom artwork. And while these are the Japanese versions of each collection, both of them are presented in English. Only the Japanese games have been left untranslated. Even then, they're mostly in English too. Now, for any of you collectors out there, you might be thinking, dude, I've owned most of these games for over 30 years now, this is just a shameful cash grab. Well again, if you didn't know, many of the home ports of these games were actually pretty different to the arcade versions. Darkstalkers 3 on the PS1, for example, is actually not a port of the arcade game. It's a weird mashup of Vampire Savior and the two updated versions. Cyberbots got both a PS1 and a Saturn release. They included a new playable character, although these ports, and specifically the PS1 version, were far from arcade perfect. They had missing frames of animation, had features cut, and didn't run as smoothly as the originals. So not only does this collection have a lot of great games, but it has the proper arcade versions, running as smoothly as they would have in the arcades. Okay, so how about the collections themselves? Let's start off with the Capcom Fighting Collection. Firstly, there's almost no difference between the English and Japanese versions of this collection. A couple of labels and title screens have minor differences, but otherwise they're the same. This is a really outstanding collection of games. It's all wrapped up in a fast and intuitive UI, so getting around and swapping between games is super fast. Every game has a training mode as well as online play. You can even choose the matchmaking to search for multiple games at the same time. They've added quality of life improvements for selecting secret characters too. If you're familiar with these games, you'd know that unlocking secret characters normally requires very specific steps. Now it's as simple as pressing up on a character in the character select screen. Like unlocking Akuma in Hyper Street Fighter 2 is now just up on Ryu. Nice. This collection has a truckload of additional content to look at in the museum. A lot of this has never been seen before, and it's a fascinating look behind the scenes. My only complaint with this collection is the way that the button remapping has been handled. Instead of having the commands presented as a list where you just press a button to bind it to that command, they've done it the other way around. So you have the buttons presented as a list, and you have to scroll through the commands to set it to what you want. Other than that, this is an awesome collection, and I hope that this is the benchmark for all Capcom collections moving forward. The 25th Anniversary Collection is a pretty good collection overall, but it's not as well presented as the Capcom Fighting Collection. The collection of games is excellent. Street Fighter 1, basically every version of Street Fighter 2, Alpha and Street Fighter 3. If you want to own all the mainline entries of the 2D Street Fighter games, this is the ticket. The Japanese version of this collection was released 5 months after the English release, and it allows you to swap between the US and Japanese ROMs, which is a feature that would eventually make it into the Capcom Fighting Collection. This alone, in my opinion, makes the Japanese version superior, not just from a gameplay and entertainment point of view, but also from a preservation point of view. Like the Fighting Collection, it has a museum full of artwork and other interesting things to look at. It's not nearly as comprehensive, but if you like this sort of stuff, there's plenty to absorb. There are a couple of issues worth keeping in mind. The ROMs chosen are somewhat questionable. It would have been nice to have included the later versions of the Alpha games, such as Alpha 2 Gold and Alpha 3 Upper. These have additional characters and modes. Instead, it's the vanilla arcade versions. Also, the version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo included in the English release is notorious for having a bug that locks it to the hardest possible setting. This bug was in the arcade game, and I guess it's great that we're getting the authentic arcade experience, but it's basically impossible for casuals. That's why having the Japanese version is essential. The UI isn't anywhere near as nice or intuitive as the Fighting Collection either. Actually, I kind of hate it. You have to back right out to the top level menu to change between the English and Japanese versions, and overall it's just an ugly looking UI. It does have the button config setup I prefer though. Another issue with this collection is that the win-lose screens are absent when playing online. They've obviously done this to reduce the time between fights, which is nice if you just want to get back into the action ASAP. My preference would have been just to leave them in though. The last issue I have with this collection is that not every game has a training mode or online versus. I'm guessing that the pool of people who want to play the original Street Fighter in ranked matches would be pretty low. That said, I would have liked the option, and a system like what's in the Fighting Collection would have been my preference here. So it's not a perfect collection, particularly when looking at the 30th anniversary disc. It is nice having all of these games in the one spot though. And for a lot of people, the selection of games and the specific ROMs chosen won't be a problem. Now, you could buy both of these discs separately and it would essentially be the same thing. But if you're interested in owning both of them, this is a nice way to get them together. You get the best version of the 30th anniversary collection, and you also get a unique sleeve to put them in, which is not something that you'll see sitting on a lot of shelves. So if you're into collecting, this is definitely worth considering. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative. If you did, drop me a like. If you didn't, drop me a dislike. Hit the subscribe and bell notification to stay up to date with all my content. Check out the Patreon if you want to see some behind the scenes stuff and support what I do. But otherwise, thanks for your time.